Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 27th day of February 2022. My title of my talk today is simply is why do we have leaders and why do we follow them? It seems to be a predicament that almost all of this planet has this habit of always having to or believing in what I would call we have to have leaders, but they never actually ask themselves, why am I following these leaders? I think there's a serious problem with mankind that he looks to someone else to emulate, that is, to follow. He seems to have lost his whole essence of who he is, his essence of that somehow there's something wrong with him, or that he has to be obedient to someone. Part of that is part to do with what we're taught as youngsters, especially from my parents. We're already taught at a very early age that I know I was to obey our parents, love our parents, be obedient to our parents. All that was part of the thinking. My background was a Christian background and grew up in a Christian house and believed in these things and took it very seriously. And that goes even further. It goes on to the point when you went to church that the authority there, and that's the word I would recommend, is that it's the pastor. Or if you go on to the point when you go into school, it's the principal or the teacher. Why do we have to go to school? Why is it compulsory? In other words, why can't we go back in time and see what life was like before there was school? Just contemplate that. Why do we do these things? Why do we submit to this particular programming this in our lives? We choose to follow people. Is it the way we feel inferior? Is that what causes us to look to others? Are we insecure in who we are? In other words, we're not secure in our own abilities, in our own thinking. Is that what takes place in our school? Is that what really takes place? There's a psychological um, tools that are used to break those who are what we would call leaders, maybe in at an early age, to break them, to break their own intuitive ideas, or just simply as they're not going to go along with this. We would call these people somewhat rebels. They rebel against what they would call authority, or just rebel against anything that was contrary to what they felt was true. And so, with this whole deal with people following their leaders or believing in their leaders, we're held captive. We're held captive because we give our energy to these people who we put on a pedestal or a pulpit, so to speak. In church, we would think that that would be again the pastor or a preacher. Well, he knows more than I know. He's read the Bible. He's studied the Bible. Well, yes, but no. Maybe his perspective simply is he looks at it a certain way and he's been taught that way and he's never even examined the thinking outside of that realm, you see. In other words, he comes from a literal perspective of scripture that's all he sees because that's all he was taught. And so he assumes that's true. One of the things when I was in seminary over 20 years ago, I remember sitting in class in a systematic theology class, and there was a professor there, actually the president of the school that I went to, the seminary. And I come from different varieties of backgrounds. I'd been Baptist, I'd been independent Baptist, I'd been a Nazarene, as part of the Wesley Church, Wesleyan. I've been involved in a Grace Brethren Church, which is what we would call German Baptist, but has a lot of roots towards the Anabaptist movement that took place. And 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 then eventually I went to a Presbyterian church, which is basically based upon John Calvin. And I couldn't understand why the preacher or the teacher, I should say, the professor I'm talking about, would be someone who eventually would be involved in the war in the Middle East. And I couldn't reconcile that. Why would you, being a seminary president of the school and a professor, why would you need to go and fight on a foreign land that no one's you? In other words, they have not attacked us, so it's not a defensive mechanism. So you went and attacked them, and believing that somehow these people were a threat to us. So you bought into the propaganda of what these people want. And yet, to me, scripture was not always about war. And why is the love of country more important than even your spiritual perspective? You see, why is that put up on a pedestal? You claim that God is true, and which another question is simply who is God, which I don't like to use that word because it fits in a slot, and it makes you become more Christianized. In other words, that there's some kind of God out there, and you have to worship him. Well, the question is simply, why would you even need to worship a God? And they would come back to you and say, well, there's a choice between worshiping God or worshiping man. And I'm like, but we don't even know who this being is. You see, God. So why are we worshiping it? And is this something you've been programmed yourself with, or you grew up in? Again, like I say, so it puzzles me that this professor and I grew up in what I would call eventually at the age of 15 or 16 years old. The Vietnam War was still going on close to that proximity, and I had no desire to kill anybody else. Why would I want to kill anybody? Well, my country says they're communists. Well, that's over there. That's way across to half the world away in Vietnam. You see, my thinking is simply is that we arbitrarily just simply believe what is spelled out or spilled out through television or the news agencies as though it's true, or the media. We never ask ourselves simply is this really true? And if it is, why would I want to be involved? I remember talking to a young guy. This is again during the Arabic deal here in the Middle East, and he was working in a tire shop, and he was 18 years old. He says he's going to sign up for them and fight these bad people. I'm like, wait a minute, who are the bad people here? Are they over here fighting us? Are they killing us? Have they attacked our country? No, they were told that they attacked our country since they took over these airplanes, so to speak, which that was a vicious lie. What is the reason for wars? The bottom line for wars has always been to take from others. That's it. That's the bottom line, folks, is to take from whatever they have, either some type of minerals or oils or something valuable in their country that you want to take from them. And what right do you have to take from them? You see? Well, we're blessed of God. Well, they would go around and simply as they say, well, they're blessed of God because they have a different religion. They would say Allah, and we would say God, see. But this is all what I would call a division. It's dividing people. If you see it this way, we are all God's children. We are all here. Now, some are on different paths. Some are young souls. Some are older souls, so they've been around many, many, many times here, so to speak, if you see what reincarnation is all about. And yet, it it seems they play on upon that upon us. And there's something great going on here, or something wicked going on around us as you look around here, and you can see all these signs that are around you that we're not living in Kansas anymore, so to speak, and we're not. And so this whole blind faith, or well, we have to believe them, such and such. Or the other analogy is simply is that well, he's the president, such and such. So what? Is that the only reason? And the other idea simply is that you could ask yourself is that we are considered civilized. Really? Well, I wonder what people were like uncivilized, because it seems as though if we go back and look at a book by R.J. Rummel, Rummel, he wrote a book simply as Death by Government back in the late 1990s, and pointed out simply as there was last century from 1900 to 2000 or 1999, there were more people killed by their own governments than war. That should scare you to death there. Over almost 170 million people were killed. 170 million people were killed by their governments. That's not counting war. That's not counting war, folks. Because there's a blind submission to government. People are obedient to them. And a lot of it is to do with fear. Lots to do with simply they're fearful of their government. The government really doesn't have any power. The only power they have is simply as what I would call, they bewitch you. They fool people and saying patriotic songs and the flag and this and that. When reality simply is, if you look at it today, there are no countries. They're just corporations. We know that. The United States ceased to be a country in 1871, but they programmed you through education and teaching this is a country, you're free, such and such. But how do you know you're free? Have you gone to other countries and see what they're like? Or are you allowed to even go to those countries and see what they're like? These bad countries, such and such. And rightfully so, some of these countries may be bad. But how do you know that? How do you know that your government is telling you the truth? And why would you need a passport to go to somewhere? You see, these are questions you must ask yourself simply is, why do I have to always volunteer to do such and such? Why do I have to have a passport? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to pay taxes? Why do I have to do all these things that actually steal from me as an individual who's done no harm to anybody? You see? Why hasn't man been able to come to the point simply as to self-govern himself, to follow natural law, to understand that, as Jesus would say, do unto others as you would like to be done yourself. And I think people do that, but they put this pillar, they think they put these leaders up on pillars on a podium as though they're godlike, when in reality they're not. And they're able to do this even easier now with either radio or television to show all kinds of information, And in fact, they will explain you what the president speaks, even though you obviously you can listen to it and understand it, but they have to come along and to spiel it out to you. This is a form of basically, you're too dumb to understand, so we're going to spell it out to you. Are you going to figure it out? You need to understand you are the authority. You always have been the authority in anything in what you do. If you choose to harm someone, you will pay the price in one way or the other. It may not happen through, jail time or anything of that nature, but you will pay for it some way. You see? And it doesn't take a government to do that. And why do we have this apparatus, this whole thinking of having to be taxed to your death, and you're born into a system? All this thing is like it's like a it's not even human. It's not even human to do. It's like lack of a better word, it's like a matrix. People just simply they they eat and drink this. They believe in it to the point simply is they subject themselves to it. They never ask questions and why they're even here. What is this place? What is Earth? Why are we even here? Did I choose to come here, or was I forced to come here? I mean, I'm asking a lot of questions here, and I don't have all the answers, but there has to be you have to ask questions in order to try to find answers. And if you don't ask questions, you'll never find the answers. And a lot of times simply is you need to think, and that takes time. And most people today want to be entertained. You know why? Because they don't want to deal with reality. Reality scares them to death. And I was visiting yesterday at a couple stores, and I observe things and watch people such and such. And again, I live in the state of South Carolina. There are no what I would call from the government, that is from the governor here of South Carolina. There's no mandates, which mandates are not even a law. But there is no law saying you don't have to wear a mask. And yet people choose to wear masks. Why is that? Why is that? Why do people do that? Is it fear? Is it fear from authority? Is it pushed so much, this type of thinking? They do call this thing a germ theory, don't they? It's a theory. It's not a fact. Why do I have to take something outside of me to quote unquote make me better? Why, what, I am wonderfully, fearfully made, aren't I? I'm an individual. I'm totally different than someone else. I'm totally different than my brother, you see, even though I'm from the same family. But my personality and makeup is completely different than my brother. Doesn't mean he's bad. Doesn't mean I'm bad. It's just as simply as we're different. So we willingly submit ourselves to someone who claims authority, and we void who we are. We have value, or what we call simply is I've read some things such and such from other writers. Where do these voices come in our lives, that in our head is that that is to do with quote unquote, why did I feel inferior? Why did I feel not loved? Why did I feel depressed? Well, you're not good enough. That's what this would tell you up here. You're not good enough. Or you don't make enough money, so you're not good enough. Where does that come from? Where does that sense of, and some would say, oh, well, that comes from, your other self, such and such, you're divided. Well, possibly. I don't have the answers here, but there has to be what I would call probing the questions, asking the questions and saying, is this true or not of me? And am I at war? In other words, am I at war with even myself within me? Because that's what's going on. I'm at war with myself. And so in a way of feeling insecure in who, maybe in my war with myself, then I in some ways give my authority away. or that's what I've been taught to do. That's what we've always done. How do you know that's what you've been taught? How do you know that was true? How do you know anything is true? The word history itself is his story. Break down the words, his story. We know that the victors in any battles or wars will always rewrite history in order to make themselves greater. Either it's the Romans, the Greeks, or the Egyptians, or whoever it is. They will rewrite the books in order to show that they were a great, prosperous country or whatever power that they were in the past, so to speak. The only thing is simply is I say this is to how do we, and in other words, why do we have leaders? And most of these leaders are lawyers. Have you observed that? The politicians are lawyers. Do you see any farmers in here that are politicians? Do you see any salesmen that were politicians? Do you ever see any, lack of better, have you ever seen even a preacher being a politician? I'm not saying, but I'm just saying simply why is this whole enigma of simply anybody in politics is a lawyer? Why not someone else? Why do we do that? Well, they make law. They create fictional law. It's third party. It's on a book. It doesn't come from natural law. It's contrary to natural law. Every bit of it is against natural law. Natural law is from the heart. Man-made law is from the head. You see? And you're divided in your head, you see? And man-made law, as lawyers, create, and I'm pointing this out, create laws that make us criminals, but no one sees that the lawyers themselves are the actual criminals. They paint you as the bad person. Why would they need to make all these laws and rules all the time? You remember, the speech that George Bush gave. Yes, the New World Order, not the law of the jungle. I mean, think about that. As though the New World Order is civilized, we're that, such as, and we don't act like the Iraqis. You see? But who chose to go over there and kill innocent people? We actually now have used to be the point I'm trying to share with you simply is that when George Bush used those words, civilized world is the law of the jungle. That's what it is. It's not civilized. That's just a word painted on there to make it look good. It's amazing, how this whole thing with even what Trudeau is saying in Canada, again, it's a whole way of dividing people over and over and over. And they are the minority. They're not the majority here, folks. They're just using clever propaganda to divide you over and over and over again to keep you divided from your brothers and sisters that are all around you, who are all now going to be in the same boat as as the economy is going to bust. All of us are going to be poor, you see, in this realm, unless someone realizes simply is that those who do this are working for the corporations. One other example. in political science, in politics. Who gives the money for these candidates? And do you really have a right to choose these candidates? You see, in other words, you have certain candidates that are allowed to be on the ballot, but some candidates are not allowed to be on the ballot. You have to pay a fee in order to be on the ballot. I know you would say, well, if there would be hundreds and hundreds of people running. Yeah, I understand that. It would have to be such and such. But the point simply is, when you look at this, who are the candidates that raise the most money? And when you look at this, very little of it comes from the ordinary person. All of it comes from some kind of organization or business, such and such, wanting them to represent their viewpoint. So, in other words, it's the people who have the money who actually are the very small minority that dictate who even becomes a candidate and then whoever gets elected. Because once they're, selected, these candidates, such and such, then you really don't have it either nor, you see. They're only what we would call a two-party system in this country, which symbolizes simply as the right and left. There's no middle party. There's not a party, see. But see, that's all. This is another misnomer, see. It's another way of being misled, because in reality simply is that you believe in a leader. You don't see yourself as the authority. And so as this continues on, and this is a massive psyop going on, the whole thing that took place in the last 2 years with the number of 2020 was to do with a vision. You have 2020 vision. Well, the 2020 to me simply means that do you see with real eyes and realize what's really going on? That was the beginning play, or act one. But the real deal is they're going to implode all the economies in the world. And the United Nations is going to be the ones who are going to take over. They're going to take the power. It's the new world order. So there won't be any countries or whatever who no longer disagree, because this is part of a corporation, all corporations. And then this will allow those with only the corporations that have stood the test of time, so to speak, will be allowed to rule mankind. And one of the ways I suggest you look at this is to realize that fear is here for a purpose. Either you either crawl underneath the bed, or you stand and say, no, that's not going to happen with me. And you may get killed. You may get killed, you see. But you have to stand for principles, and you cannot allow them to run over you. And you are a source of what we would call of God, or a source of the Creator. You're created in His image, you see. Or you're not. And so the whole thing that's going on here is this is it's an act two. It's a whole deal. But they've already given you warnings, folks. They've told you what they're going to do. They made it clear. You can read certain books about it, but you can also go to Georgia Guidestones. They're warning. Those who rule this planet hate life. They hate it because themselves have been traumatized themselves immensely. In fact, all of us have been traumatized. But those who rule are ones who have been heavily traumatized, to the point simply is many of them don't have any way out, so to speak. And I'm not saying simply, these are bad, we need to forgive these guys. I'm just sharing you the whole perspective here, not a divided view, because all of us have basically been traumatized. All the well-to-do families, such as, why do they do this? They intermarry together. They don't marry because they love each other. They marry because simply is that we need children and we want to continue our what I would call our way of life, the well-to-do, and this is the only way we know how to do this. And so one rich family will marry into another rich family, such and such. It had nothing to do with love. It has to do with everything about control and money. Why do you think we create wars and do this? which I've spoken about just as quickly a while ago, is to take from others. But why does the government get involved? Because these industrialists, these powerful people, push these governments, whoever these people that they paid. And hey George, you told me you were going to do this. Now you going to do this, or else we're going to, get involved in such and such country. We know that they have gold in that country. We know that they have oil in it. We want to build a tank. We want to build a pipeline across this area, such and such, to be more feasible to send oil to Europe. We can make money this way. It's all about greed. They don't see. In fact, they would say, they have said, in the Iraqi war, in the war that took place in the Middle East, they're either subhuman or half human. Well, that's interesting when you compare that to thinking that that's a form of propaganda saying you're better than they are, but you're being used, see, if you're in the military, or you're being used because you follow the flag. Why do we pledge allegiance to the flag? It's just a symbol, you see, but it's a way of getting you into this whole mess of thinking that this is credible. We've got to stand as a country, such and such. But yet, when I look at my own country here, we're divided too. There's divided. Well, there's rich and poor. There's black and white. There's I make 100 grand and you make 10, and I'm better than you. Or I have this, or I went to college and I've got a master's degree, or I've got a PhD, so I'm much smarter than you. I always say PhD is pile high and deeper, as you know, analysis, type of thing. But anyway, so this whole idea simply is, why do we have leaders, and why do we follow them? And you must ask yourself simply, do you want to continue to follow these people? One of the things that took place with the Soviet Union and why it fell was the people realized they'd been lied to. That's the trick. They've been lied to and realize, I can no longer believe this. They sold me a lie that this was going to be a utopia, the Soviet Union, and everything was going to be provided for me. But I'm worse off than I was before. And I'm actually less free than I was before. You see? And the reason why it fell, because simply is there was no longer any faith in the government anymore. And it took place, and it gradually, and the government knew this, and they could feel it. You see? So I just wanted you to understand these things. I want you to sense what's going on and not be caught up in what I would call is us against them. It's us against them. When reality simply is, it's just us. We're here. And we've got to learn how to love one another and take care of one another. And probably that's what this whole thing is about, is for us to be integrated to seeing there is no us in them anymore. It's just we. And unless we come to that reconciliation, or recognize that, I should say, then we have failed this test, so to speak. You see? So I just thought I'd share. Again, I didn't plan to go this long, but I hope that what I've shared with you would give you knowledge and wisdom in the near future, because we're going to have to help one another. We got to see that each of us are brothers and sisters, and there is a war against us human beings. And why do we have to follow these people? We don't. We don't have to. Trust in yourself. You're far greater than they are, because you choose not to harm others. You choose to do what is right, and you grow from that. Thank you, and you have a great day, okay?